So thanks a lot for turning up, Lou. The participants have arrived. You have a big audience. Please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 30 minutes for, do you have the share screen for everyone? Yes, yeah. So we have 30 minutes to have a general discussion among us based on the videos that we have presented already. There is a lot of commonality in the themes of the things that we have all talked about. I've talked about reference and feedback in a very general way. Robert Cutler talks about the emergence of structures in the political realm. Andre Cretu talks directly about the general form of a feedback loop and how the context has to be included. And Howard Silverman talks about identity, recursion, and context. So I think we should just open the floor among us to discussing these themes. Perhaps Robert would like to start?
Well, I was advised that I should give a bit of a introduction of personal background so that people know
Yes.
where I'm coming from. I'll start with that. It's really, I'll just tell it very briefly chronologically because I can't really generalize about it. I started out in physics and mathematics, became interested in social change, ended up in history, then political science, wrote a PhD dissertation on Soviet foreign policy. After the Soviet foreign policy fell apart, so after the Soviet Union fell apart, I stayed in Europe and Eurasia looking at the restructuring of the international system, amongst other things, from the bottom up. And that's one of the places I got interested in emergence to help me to make sense of things. In the late 1990s, Michael Lissick introduced me to complexity, and I discovered that there was an entire language to express the ideas that I was trying to get political scientists to understand that they had always been giving me blank stares about. So I looked further into complexity and used it to, what I'm best known now for is energy security and how the energy hydrocarbon complexes form themselves in a complex evolutionary manner throughout Europe and Eurasia. I've also done work on philosophy of science and some other things that are also pertinent that might come up later. That's that's a brief intellectual history of me as it relates to complexity. The other thing that I should say that I mentioned at the very foot of the video was that, probably like all of us, I've also been using frameworks from the study of the science of complex systems to understand how people evolve. And I am an element of that class, so I apply it also to myself. And sometimes it intersects with some of the more social science work I'm doing, social science oriented work I'm doing in order to verify insights. Sometimes it doesn't. And there you have it. That's me. Hi.
Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself and we can go around and introduce ourselves and then come down in another round of talking about the themes. I'm Louis Kaufman. I'm a mathematician and interested in cybernetics, and I tend to work on things having to do with language and the way language turns on itself. And I've been particularly interested in Heinz von Forster's notion of eigenforms, and I'll let it go at that, and we could go on to Stu.
Oh, I'm at the bottom of the list. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I was listening to Lou's presentation before signing in, and I found it fascinating, but I have one specific question. Lou was talking a lot about language and meta-language, and I've done some work with group facilitation methods as a way of helping a group of people come to an understanding, act, and then come back, reconsider what they had done, formulate further plans, act, and come back. And so I'm just wondering if Lou has thought about that set of problems, the group facilitation problems, in addition to the individual and language. I'll stop there.
Sure. Could you say a few more words about yourself? We're doing an introduction at this point, but you can bring that up on the next round.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Well, I studied with Heinz von Forster at the University of Illinois and had a few conversations with Ross Ashby. And then after that, got to know Umberto Maturana, though I didn't work closely with him, Stafford Beer, and some of the other founders of the field. And I've been involved in cybernetics since I was a student at the Biological Computer Laboratory at the University of Illinois. And then I was at George Washington University, and now I'm retired.
Thank you. Howard?
Hello, I'm in Portland, Oregon, amidst the ash, and I teach in an art school design program, systems and foresight, with an emphasis, of course, on cybernetics.
Thank you. Andre Cretu?
Hi. I started out in electrical engineering, but ended up as a linguist. And I tend to work on mathematical models. I try to understand the basics, the foundational stuff. I'm very much interested in Ross Ashby's work, and my presentation based off of a number of remarks that Ashby made in his journal back in the 40s on feedback. So that's about it.
Thank you very much. Larry, are you also on the panel itself? Is there another person who's on the panel, formally on the panel? So it's just Stu and my...
Is Stephen Paff here?
I'm sorry?
Stephen Paff, is he here? He's listed on the panel.
Who's the other person listed?
Stephen Paff.
Paff.
Yeah, I will look for him, but I don't think he's here.
Okay. Right. But, okay. So getting back to Stu's question, I have used these ideas in exploring how we work with distinctions so that it becomes very interactive, but I haven't tried other kinds of group process in relation to this. It would be very interesting to do that. But that's just in direct answer to what Stu was asking me. We can go back and talk about any aspect of the themes that are coming out of the different presentations that we made. Anyone want to start?
I have a question for Andre.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I was very interested in your notion, if I understood it correctly, of the actor, for lack of a better term, as a complement to the environment, if I understand that correctly. I was wondering whether it makes any sense to you, and what would be the implications to consider that the boundary between the actor and the environment is non-zero, and that the actor is not a complement but a pseudo-complement, which includes that boundary, violating the law of the excluded middle.
I'm not sure. I'd have to first understand how that could be modeled mathematically. Then maybe I could address this. I'm struggling with these things myself. In a way, I'm inclined to take a mathematical approach to things, and if there's something that I cannot express mathematically and understand mathematically, understand how the machine works, then I tend to withhold my opinion. I'd have to take time to understand your model better and try to look into it.
It's not a model. It's just a logical construction, mathematical logical construction. But there are many sorts of mathematics, and you perhaps use something that's not conducive to that.
I could make a comment about that. When we're speaking informally about actor and environment, we would not normally be thinking of them as being absolutely separated. We would be thinking about how the boundary works in one way or another, how things are exchanged. The question you're asking is how a simple mathematical model could include that, because the simplest possible models that we're working with are quite exclusive in that regard. If you're working topologically, then sets have boundaries, and then the boundary could be regarded as what is in common between the actor and the environment. And whether simple topological models are good enough for your purposes depends on the complexity and properties of what you're discussing. But to go one step further, indeed, non-standard logics like hiding algebras can be modeled topologically, and I won't go into the details of that.
But you're correct to point out that it is classically the boundary that is considered to be common between the pseudo-complement and that to which it is the pseudo-complement. In some of my work on Lakatos and people like that, I came upon the notion of not a physical non-zero boundary, but a boundary that has logical content. And that was actually the motivation of my question.
Mm-hmm.
So just simply to further explain, not requiring or expecting any reply, but Lou, thank you. You motivated me to make more clear what I was thinking at the time.
If I may try, our basic units of analysis are these information processing units that have inputs and outputs. That's what constitutes a general system in the meaning of Meserovich and Takahara. And so then what I'd like to know in regard to your question was, do you see this non-zero boundary as a separate information processing unit able to do its own processing? Then integrating it into a model would simply mean concatenating or otherwise coupling the respective information processing units.
I do not know that it would have autonomous information processing capability. It would produce hypotheses from new information. At the same time, it is capable of being acted upon and even absorbed into that of which it is in the boundary of.
That's very interesting. I can think of it in terms of let's say more complex input space for a system, where one of the dimensions is kept constant, for example, and we have the possibility of opening it, yeah, by taking into account this this non-zero boundary, as you say, and then of course our the initial system would just complexify, would just start behaving different under different circumstances.
That's absolutely right. That's what happens.
Might it be possible to have a non-abstract example of this this particular issue that's being discussed?
Yes, a non-abstract example is the totalitarian model of the Soviet Union, which, in order to maintain itself after Stalin died and blood purges stopped, created, or its proponents created, what auxiliary hypotheses and ad hoc hypotheses to explain why the Soviet Union should still be seen as a totalitarian system, notwithstanding the fact that some characteristics that were held to be essential to totalitarianism were no longer manifest there. As time went by, other individuals studying the matter looked at these ad hoc hypotheses and said, well, they're not really ad hoc. If we change the hard core of the research program, then we can integrate these ad hoc hypotheses into a new framework that is more parsimonious and seems to explain things better. That is a concrete example. I hope it is concrete enough.
I have a question in the direction of a slightly more abstract, concrete example that may help in the discussion between Andre and Robert. Think back to the paper by Maturana, Uribe, and Varela about autopoiesis, and they have a very tiny model of autopoiesis in which there is a soup of molecules. The molecules, in the presence of a catalyst, tend to bind together, and so as a result of that, one tends to find in the two-dimensional space of the model cells forming around catalysts. And once the cells are formed, it's possible to talk about input and output in the sense of the breaking open of the wall of the cell, the catalyst moving in and out, and so on. But prior to the emergence of the boundaries, there are no actors in the sense of the cells, and there are no inputs and outputs. So that in that vision of autopoiesis, one sees the emergence of the structures which we now label as feedback, input, and output. And I think that this model and this particular way of thinking about it speaks to the themes of both of you very strongly. Comment?
Andre, please, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to say I'm glad I was able to kind of finally understand what Robert's question was about, and I'd like to offer an example of a system. Let's suppose it's an electrical system that has a number of hidden switches, right? And the hidden switches would turn what the system was initially modeled as into something else, into a qualitatively new system. This is a possible analogy, as far as I can understand, of this non-zero barrier that can at some point be activated, and maybe I'm still not sure.
No, I understand that the electrical questions have specific imply specific gating issues that would model the process, and it's these things that are that would be in fact probably particular to every case, or at least there would be a class of them, or a number of arrangements and configurations and permutations of them that would be necessary in order to express every possible variety of the mechanism, of multiple mechanisms, I mean. So I understand what you're saying.
Howard, how would you see these issues of feedback and emergence from your point of view?
Well, I would begin from speaking from my point of view. I've been thinking about my place in the cosmos, my place within the matrix that embeds. And I've been focused on recursive relations, micro, meso, macro relations, in which the micro is me, the macro is all that is, and the mesos, countless mesos, are those contexts in between. The context with which I couple and the context with which I am coupled. What is a context that one might know it? That's the riddle of the Sphinx, one version. And if I'm to know these contexts, how am I to know them? And so I describe this coupling, my context and I, as a Varelian complementarity, like environment system, like it and the process leading to it. Around me is the context, and embedded within is me, for whom the contexts are contexts. My identities manifest with my showing up in them. I also describe this pair of asymmetrical terms, context showing up, as a first-second formulation, analogous to observing. And so I have a pair of questions. How many first-second formulations are there, and how analogous and distinct are they?
And in your Varelian dichotomies, each is the context for the other, and each emerges from the other. So the question of complementarity takes a different shape in that form.
Right. That's the recursive, yes.
Mm-hmm. So then that kind of recursiveness becomes a different kind of answer to the question, where is the interrelationship between the apparently opposite or distinct thing and what it is not.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments, Stu?
Okay, let me expand a little bit on my interests over time. When I became involved with the American Society for Cybernetics, I was trying to increase the activity in the society. And I knew that systems in cybernetics had been a big thing in the Soviet Union, and it was presently a small thing in the US. So as luck would have it, I sat next to Aaron Atzenkellenboygen from the University of Pennsylvania, who was originally from Russia, at a ISSS conference. And he introduced me to Vadim Sadovsky from the Institute for System Studies in Moscow. And over dinner, we cooked up an idea to do a correspondence project between Soviet and American scientists. And it turned out that was very easy to get money for, because programs were being canceled right and left because the Soviets were coming down hard on their scientists, and so there was money on the table. In any case, I started working with Soviet scientists, and then in 1990, when the Soviet Union pretty much collapsed, the US government was giving money to bring over scholars from the former Soviet Union to learn management methods and American academic theories, economic theories. And I hosted a series of about 150 scholars at GW over the subsequent years. And along the way, I taught them group facilitation methods and the idea that they would be more productive when they went back. So my description of the evolution of the Soviet Union would be that under the Tsar, they had a very repressive, brutal system. Then when the communists took over and tried to become more humanistic, the only model they had was a brutal repressive system. So they changed the name of it and did the same thing over again. And that worked reasonably well during World War II and so forth. But then after the war, they discovered their system was not innovative. And so they have since been looking for alternatives while still trying to keep the Communist Party in power. So that's a project I've been working on for a long time. That is, how do you encourage people in a system to be more innovative, more cooperative, and work together to loosen up and transform the larger system? And that's another variation of what I was saying about what Lou was talking about, is how do you change the language that the people are using such that new possibilities arise? And I think that is some interest to Robert Cutler and Andrei Krejcik. I'll stop there.
Thank you. You know, we're supposed to allow breakout rooms. I'm not quite sure what the mechanics are for taking us to the breakout rooms.
All right, so the mechanics are very easy, and we'll start with breakout rooms. And the only thing that all the participants will need to remember is, if you come up with questions for the remaining
Larry, are you there?
Well, I don't want to put all the weight on Larry now, but we have nothing to say because of the technical difficulties, but perhaps Larry has something to say.
Uh-huh. What about anyone else? Anyone else have something they wish to say?
Yeah.
We had a
Sorry,
question.
posting stuff into the chat window as well.
Yeah.
So is this the share out?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I was in a group with Mr. Silverman, Jenkinson, and Battle. And I think the key takeaway between, in the panel talk, the appreciation where this cybernetic organization, where we can bring in these very abstract theoretical conversations that are much more, they're structured, they can be ethereal, artistic. And then we appreciate, examples that were given, as Jenkinson had mentioned. Can you give example of how these structures and models and theories can be applied in organizations, in design, in business, and what are those intersections? So be able to bridge that understanding, I think, was the main takeaway that we had in our breakout session, to really appreciate what cybernetic thinking can be, that overarching and shared thoughts, and that how it lives and functions in the world. I hope I captured that, so please intervene.
So you're saying that of course, it helps to look at actual examples and see how they're working in relation to these ideas.
Yes. I think because we live in different worlds, in the business world, design may have a very different jargon and interaction within their world versus the business world. And yet design and business has to work together to fulfill a company's goal output of a product or service, and the consumer then consumes it. So I think we have goals, but we may translate the means of doing it differently. And therefore, how does that collaboration happen?
Right, and that's something to be investigated. I mean, if there's something to take away there, one thing to take away is that it really results in a lot of open questions. You take one domain like design, which has a lot of ideas in it, and you may ignore them when you're over in the business region, but you needn't. If you go up to the cybernetic level and look for what can be transferred and what you can use, then you find that there's a gold mine of things that can happen between these.
I also want to share one more thought, and that's the philosophical, and that is we also have our own value system, our own goals on how we want to interact and the boundaries with organizations, with relationship. And so, there's like a whole consciousness, and whether are we conscious of the value that we have set against those systems, organizations, and relationship, and how does that translate in the product, the design, the business model, and how does that interpret in your marketing message as well? And that's it.
Thank you. Other reactions to the breakout?
Peter had a question, if you could.
Sure. I don't know if this is off topic. I'm not sure what the topic is, but in terms of autopoiesis and the example that was given of a boundary, you know, of course, the 2D autopoietic simulations assume that there are boundary components that are
there are components that can become elements of a boundary
that make a spatial boundary. But if you have a set of processes, like enzymatic processes, and there's a subset that mutually reinforces the production of the whole set, then that's sort of a natural boundary that forms a subset of mutually reinforcing processes. And there is no boundary component per se in that. So that demarcates.
Yeah, that's right. You have a process that is interrelating that, but it isn't a geometrical boundary.
Yeah, it's like a functional boundary.
That's why I was skeptical about my own comment about using topology in a direct way. But topology can actually talk about what is related to A is related to B. Something is related to something else in some space which isn't necessarily the three-dimensional space.
Yeah. So I was just throwing that out.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, it's relevant in the context of thinking about neural dynamics in the brain. I think in terms of a signal-centric view of the brain in which there are complex neural signals, these are temporal codes, and they're interacting and mutually either reinforcing or mutually amplifying or interfering with each other. And the circulating set of neural signals at any one time constitutes the contents of our minds. And some subset of that is the contents of our conscious awareness. That's sort of what motivates that for me.
But we always have the question when it comes to the brain that we can think of contents that are large-scale states of the network or circulating in the network.
Yeah.
But we don't know how to bridge the gap between that and our sense of a mental state that we have. At least I don't know how to bridge the gap between my sense of my own mental state and what's going on with the neurons.
Well, the problem of neural coding has to do with identifying the signals that are associated with different states, like hearing a particular pitch or smelling a particular smell or having a particular idea even. And so one could think about the functional states as being made up of which signals are circulating or are actively being regenerated in neural circuits at any one time. That's kind of the gist of the idea. As opposed to say which particular neurons are firing and their connections. Mm-hmm. It's all in the dynamics and the signals rather than in the patterns of which neurons are activated. That's basically what a temporal code is.
Oh, I see. But that's still in the patterning of it. It's just the temporal patterning.
Yes.
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 Yes. Right.
Anyway.
Or in my case, my favorite example is a knot on a rope like that. You see, because the knot is a patterning on the rope, but it really doesn't depend on the rope at all. It just needs a substrate.
Right.
Once it has a substrate, there it is, and somehow that's related to what goes on in biology.
Hylomorphic ontology, in which the organization of the material substrate is what gives you the functional properties and not the particularities of the substrate itself. So the organization is embedded in the substrate, but the properties ensue from the particular organization. So if you anesthetize a brain, the coherence of that regenerative process it goes away, and so we lose consciousness and the ability to do many mental operations.
And somehow we reemerge from anesthesia.
Yeah, and sleep. We do this every night.
Yeah.
You know, the global coherence breaks down, and then it and we have dreams and sleep states, and then the global coherence reemerges when we wake up, and we have waking states.
You may be right,
Yeah.
Peter.
I'm
However,
sorry. Go ahead.
It remains a problem how you are right. Some philosophers call this the hard problem, how we have raw fields or slightly more abstract things like sensations about ourselves. I, as a piece of meat at one level, have perceptions of blue or pain or cold or anger. And it's been part of the cybernetic, or at least Venus, agenda to relate structures and processes to an explanation of those subjective raw fields which we all have. It's not been proven impossible or possible yet. We've got work to do.
It's a metaphysical problem that's not resolvable by empirical means. We can find bridge laws that bridge between neural states and our experiential states. We can find those things, and we found some of them. But we don't know why it is that we have the experiences that we do. That's like asking, why does gravity exist? It's an ontological problem that's inherently not answerable through empirical science.
An Oxford researcher in gravity said the jury is out on the existence of gravity. So there you go.
Whatever, or light or matter or whatever you want.
Could we hear from some other piece of the breakout? For example, Howard, what happened in your breakout session?
That was what Nyo was talking about, and I just responded to Ben's question in the comment thread. So I observed that when von Förster talks about first-second relations, he describes his own observing as a particular formulation, as distinct from Pask's formulation. And so I wonder, how many formulations are there? And is it valuable to consider other formulations? It seems that to me that
you mean how many formulations are there of observer?
No, of the first-second relationship. That's the word that von Förster uses. And so I propose that in the cybernetics literature, there is this clear formulation, which I'm calling context showing up, or context role, or context manner of living, or context class identity. And but it hasn't been teased out and described, and that's what I'm describing in this paper.
Thank you. What about other pieces of the breakout sessions? Stu, what happened in yours? Oh, maybe he left already.
Microphone, Stu, we can't hear you.
What did you say, Michael?
I was telling Stu that we couldn't hear him because he hasn't switched his microphone.
That's what that. Stu, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, is that better?
Yeah, we were wondering what happened in your breakout.
Yeah, well, we lost a lot of people, and I injected one comment that I thought would be of interest to Cutler and Cretu, and but it didn't really pick up and go anywhere. We have also dealt with the issue of how different things happen at different levels, and how do you make jumps and action among the different levels of analysis. But we were more trying to connect logic and mathematics to social systems, I think, whereas with Cariani, it's more of a connection to neurophysiology and the operation of the brain, which is great. But so we have lots of levels going on, and different combinations of levels in different subgroups.
Yes, that's right. In my group, which was two of us, myself and Diane, she asked me, well, how do you, if a person is not mathematically trained very much, what's the use, or how does it work to go back and forth between the mathematics and the cybernetics? And so we talked about that a bit. And as you know, I mean, if you start with something in ordinary language, it has a kind of deep resonance for you because you're so fluent in language. You turn it into mathematics, it becomes highly syntactical, like writing a piece of musical notation rather than playing the music. And you have to play it again in order to actually bring back its meanings. It isn't obviously playing the moment you look at it. And on the other hand, it creates possibilities for innovation and connection with many other things. But there's much more to think about there in that relationship between syntax and semantics. Some people think that meaning arises out of syntax, and in some degree it does in mathematical work. But usually we think the other way, that we have meaning and we have some useful syntax to make it work. And there is a cybernetic interrelationship of language and syntax and meaning that is going on all the time, in back of all the cybernetics that we do.
That's a great description, Lou. Thank you.
We are now a couple of minutes away from the end of this session, so let's leave it open. Anybody who wants to say something, say.
I'd like to add just a little remark. Within that setting of system complement, it is possible to demonstrate a little theorem of reciprocal control. It is possible to show how system and complement can change roles, and how if we define control as a convergence of dynamics on a subset of inputs, then it is possible to look at either system or complement as controller and control.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'll ask a question, if I can hop in. So for a long time, I've thought of a boundary or distinction as a possible incoherence. It presents a possibility of coherence or incoherence, and we don't know yet. And I was wondering if that's something that you guys agree with. And, I'll give an example. There's a boundary between this moment and the next. Say, within a political system, there could be a revolution or it could be an evolution. And that a distinction holds those two possibilities. But not necessarily one or the other.
Yeah, so you're raising the question of coherence in the course of change.
Yes, and yes, exactly. And does a boundary, so a boundary could be considered in space, but does it represent that coherence in time also, or possible incoherence in time too?
Yeah, so there are lots of possible thoughts about this. Like in the famous mathematical model of catastrophe theory, one thinks of continuous change in the background, but it may result in a very fast and possibly chaotic change in the system itself as some part opens up and allows something to flow or change.
And it's also the changing boundaries that change permit the system to continue to cohere as well. Boundaries don't have to be static.
Right. And we probably all worry about political situations where the apparent opinions of both sides are so far away from one another that it looks like there is a huge dichotomy between the different possibilities that people are looking at.
Right.
Can I ask a question?
I believe we are at a little bit past one, so I think I should wrap us up. And thank you very much for this excellent beginning conversation on all of this. So we could probably continue for another 3 hours on this.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
No doubt. Yeah, that's right. Okay, see you all later.